Millions of Americans aren't just moving, they're escaping. Taxes, crime, housing costs, politics, natural disasters, broken infrastructure, whatever the reason, the message is the same across the country. People are done. And the numbers don't lie. Entire states are losing residents faster than they can replace them. But what's really going on behind the headlines? Why are longtime homeowners cashing out? Why are young families giving up and leaving? Why are retirees abandoning the places they plan to grow old in? This isn't just a trend, it's a full-blown mass exit, and some states are feeling the impact harder than others. While a few are booming, others are quietly unraveling under the weight of bad policies, broken systems, and rising costs. These aren't the states travel brochures brag about. These are the states people whisper about as they're planning their next move. And the truth is, most Americans have no idea which states are actually losing the most people, or why the exodus is happening so fast. In today's video, we're breaking down the top 10 states Americans are turning their backs on, and trust me, some of the names will shock you. Welcome to Mr. Globe TV, where we decode real trends, expose hidden truths, and help you navigate America's biggest changes. Drop a like, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. Number 10. Illinois. Illinois has become the kind of place where people still love the memories, the food, and the skyline, but aren't exactly thrilled about the bill that comes with staying. For years now, the state has been losing residents at a steady pace, and the reasons read like a checklist no state wants to brag about. High taxes? Check. Rising costs? Check. A pension crisis large enough to make accountants need therapy? Double check. Let's start with the tax burden, because that's one of the biggest reasons people are running out the door, like someone yelled, "Free rent somewhere else." Illinois consistently ranks among the highest tax states in the country. Property taxes alone feel like a subscription fee you never agreed to renew. Many homeowners joke that they don't actually own their homes, they just rent from the government indefinitely. It's funny until your annual property tax bill arrives and suddenly you're not laughing anymore. Then there's the long-standing financial trouble brewing behind the scenes. Illinois has one of the worst-funded pension systems in America. This means residents constantly brace themselves for the next round of budget adjustments, funding gaps, and fiscal warnings. It's the kind of uncertainty that makes families look across state lines and wonder whether life might be a little less stressful elsewhere. Another growing concern: affordability. While Chicago remains a world-class city, it's also a pricey one, especially when you factor in the cost of living, transportation, and utilities. Even people who adore the culture, diversity, and food scene find themselves questioning whether they can keep up. Combine that with slow job growth in certain regions, and it becomes clearer why many professionals choose to move to states where opportunities stretch a bit farther and incomes go a bit longer. Safety concerns have also played a role, particularly in and around major urban areas. While the entire state shouldn't be defined by Chicago's challenges, the national headlines don't exactly help the perception. Whether fair or not, that perception influences decisions, and plenty of families admit they want a quieter, more predictable environment. Weather deserves an honorable mention too. Winters in Illinois can be brutally cold, the kind that slap you awake the moment you open the front door. Combine that with high heating costs, and it's no surprise retirees and remote workers are heading south like migrating birds who finally got fed up. Still, Illinois isn't a lost cause. It remains culturally rich, economically important, and deeply loved by many who stay. But for thousands leaving each year, the math, the stress, or the weather, and sometimes all three, just don't add up anymore. Number 9. California. California used to be the place where people moved to chase dreams. Sunshine, beaches, tech jobs, movie sets, and the fantasy that you could start over with nothing but optimism and a good pair of sunglasses. But lately, the flow has reversed, and the state has been watching hundreds of thousands of residents pack up U-Hauls like the credits are rolling on a very expensive movie. The biggest reason? The cost of just about everything has drifted into "are you serious" territory. Housing prices are so high that many longtime residents joke that they're house rich but life poor. Meaning, yes, their home value has skyrocketed, but so has every bill associated with living there. The median home price sits well above the national average, and even modest rentals can feel like you're paying for oceanfront property while living nowhere near the ocean. Then there's the cost of daily life. Groceries, gas, utilities. California seems determined to make sure you feel each purchase deep within your soul. Gas prices alone could make someone rethink their entire life philosophy. When filling up a tank costs as much as a weekend trip in another state, you start to understand why people leave. Taxes add another layer to the frustration. California has some of the highest income taxes in the nation, and even middle-income earners feel the pinch. For high earners, the tax bill can look like a second rent payment. At some point, many residents started asking themselves the same question. Is the weather really worth all this? Speaking of weather, California's climate may be famous, but it's also becoming more unpredictable. Wildfires, droughts, and power shutoffs have turned the idea of sunny, carefree living into a more complicated reality. Entire communities face evacuation orders every fire season, and some residents are simply tired of living with the anxiety. Another issue driving the exodus is the growing homelessness crisis, particularly in major cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. The problem is complex, heartbreaking, and very visible, and many residents feel that solutions are moving far too slowly. Combined with rising crime concerns in certain areas, families have started choosing places where they feel they'll have more stability and less worry. Corporate and tech workers are leaving too. With remote work options expanding, many employees realize they could keep their California salary, or something close to it, while living in states where a house doesn't cost the GDP of a small country. Companies themselves are relocating, sparking job shifts that make residents rethink their long-term plans. Still, California remains a state of natural beauty, innovation, and cultural diversity. Millions wouldn't dream of leaving. But for those who have, the decision often comes down to simple math and a desire for a life that feels less financially stressful and more predictable. Number 8. New York. New York has always had a certain mythic pull. It's the place where people swear they'll make it, where entire movies are based on the idea of reinvention, and where you can get a slice of pizza at 2 a.m. without anyone judging you. But lately, the myth hasn't been strong enough to compete with the math, and the math is sending people running for more affordable zip codes. One of the biggest drivers of New York's population loss is the relentless cost of living. It's not just high, it's legendary. Housing prices in many parts of the state, especially around New York City, feel like they were calculated using wizardry. The rent alone can make someone reconsider their entire life plan. A one-bedroom apartment in Manhattan often costs more than a mortgage on a four-bedroom home in half the country. And it's not just the city. Suburban counties in the Hudson Valley and Long Island consistently rank among the most expensive in the nation for property taxes. Taxes, by the way, are a whole separate adventure. New York has some of the highest tax burdens in America. Income tax, property tax, sales tax, you name it. For many residents, especially retirees and middle-income families, the tax bill starts to feel like a second job they never applied for. It's no surprise that so many New Yorkers are trading in their snow boots for sunnier, cheaper states where their money stretches further. Then there's the weather. Yes, snow is lovely in movies and on postcards, but scraping ice off your car before work every morning? Less romantic. Winters in much of the state can be long, harsh, and seemingly endless. Combine that with aging infrastructure, delayed trains, and potholes deep enough to lose a shoe in, and the charm wears thin, fast. Crime concerns in certain areas, especially within New York City, have also played a role in the exodus. While the data shows complex trends rather than runaway chaos, perception matters. And many families say they no longer feel as safe or stable as they once did. This sentiment, paired with pandemic-era shifts toward remote work, opened the floodgates for people to move without giving up their careers. Speaking of remote work, it exposed another truth. A lot of people love the energy of New York, but don't necessarily want to live in it forever. Once workers realized they could keep their New York salaries and live in a place where rent doesn't eat half their paycheck, the decision became easier. Companies relocating or downsizing added more fuel to the trend. Still, New York remains iconic, a cultural powerhouse, a place of ambition, creativity, history, and unmatched diversity. Millions stay because they love the intensity and opportunity. But for those leaving, the reasons are deeply practical: affordability, taxes, safety, lifestyle, and the search for a calmer, more spacious life where the cost of living doesn't feel like a monthly boss battle. Number 7. Louisiana. Louisiana is a place many Americans adore from afar. The food, the culture, the music, the festivals that seem to begin before breakfast and somehow stretch into the next day. It's a state with soul. But loving Louisiana and living in Louisiana are two very different experiences, and lately the gap between the two has gotten wide enough for families, retirees, and young professionals to slip right out of it. One of the biggest drivers of Louisiana's population decline is its economy, which has struggled to keep pace with the rest of the country. Wages are low, job growth is slow, and opportunities in many regions feel stuck in time. For families trying to build stability or young residents hoping to launch a career, the options often point elsewhere, especially when nearby states offer higher income, better job markets, and more upward mobility. And then there's the cost that isn't always listed in brochures: insurance. Louisiana consistently has some of the highest homeowners and car insurance rates in the entire United States. Between hurricanes, floods, and a climate that acts like it's training for a dramatic movie role, insurance companies price accordingly. For many residents, these costs are not just steep, they're suffocating. In some places, insurance premiums are higher than mortgage payments. When your cost of living begins to feel like cost of surviving, moving becomes far less emotional and far more mathematical. The state's infrastructure adds another layer of stress. Aging roads, vulnerable levees, and drainage systems that struggle during even regular storms create a constant sense of uncertainty. Add in recurring natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, coastal erosion, and it becomes clear why many families say resilience isn't enough anymore. They want predictability, safety, and fewer emergency evacuation plans pinned to the fridge. Education is another deciding factor. Louisiana ranks near the bottom nationally in academic outcomes, teacher pay, and overall school performance. For parents who can move, the calculation is simple: better schools equal better futures, and that often means relocating. Crime rates, particularly in certain cities, also influence the decision-making. New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Shreveport have all grappled with safety concerns that push residents toward quieter, safer regions, often out of state entirely. Even those who love Louisiana's culture and vibrancy admit that quality of life, for many, has become harder to maintain. Still, Louisiana remains beloved. It's one of the most culturally rich places in the country, a state that feels like its own universe. But culture alone can't outweigh shrinking economic opportunities, overwhelming insurance costs, and environmental challenges that seem to grow each year. And that's why so many residents, after generations of staying put, are doing the unthinkable, packing up and searching for stability elsewhere. Number 6. Oregon. Oregon is one of those states people dream about: the misty forests, the mountain trails, the craft coffee that tastes like it was brewed by a monk on a spiritual retreat. It has coastline, volcanoes, waterfalls, and more shades of green than a paint store. But for many residents, the fantasy and the reality have become two very different stories, and the gap between them is driving thousands to pack up and head elsewhere. One of the biggest factors behind Oregon's population decline is the cost of living. Despite its outdoorsy, relaxed image, Oregon has quietly become one of the most expensive states in the country, particularly when it comes to housing. Portland, Eugene, Bend, and even smaller towns have seen years of soaring home prices and relentless rent increases. For many locals, wages simply haven't kept up. When your paycheck is playing hide and seek with basic expenses, suddenly the move somewhere cheaper conversation becomes a family hobby. Then there's the tax situation. Oregon's lack of a sales tax is great for buying socks and electronics, but the state makes up for it with high income taxes. Families and professionals often feel squeezed from both ends. Housing on one side, taxes on the other. And eventually, some decide they'd rather breathe mountain air without the financial altitude sickness. Another major driver is quality of life concerns, particularly in urban areas. Cities like Portland have faced challenges with homelessness, rising property crime, and a downtown recovery that seems to be walking, not running. Residents who once loved the quirky charm of the city now feel worn out by its growing pains. Many say the Oregon they fell in love with doesn't quite match the one they're living in today. Employment opportunities also play a role. While Oregon has tech hotspots and plenty of creative industries, job growth has sputtered in recent years. Young professionals appreciate the scenery, but they also appreciate paychecks that let them afford rent and groceries in the same month. Increasingly, those opportunities are popping up in other states, not Oregon. And we can't ignore the climate. Not the rain, which Oregonians wear like a badge of honor, but the wildfires. Summers filled with smoke, fire evacuations, and air quality warnings have become more common. For families with health concerns, children, or just a low tolerance for breathing campfire air 30 days a year, it's a serious reason to consider relocating. Still, Oregon remains a beautiful, deeply loved state. But even beautiful places can become financially exhausting, environmentally challenging, and emotionally draining. And that combination has convinced many residents that it's time to write a new chapter somewhere else. We're officially halfway through the countdown, and thank you for sticking with me. If you're enjoying this deep dive into America's shifting migration patterns, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's keep going. Number 5. Hawaii. Hawaii has always been marketed as the ultimate American paradise. Beaches that look photoshopped, sunsets that seem personally curated by the universe, and palm trees swaying like they're on permanent vacation. But behind the glossy travel brochures and Instagram-perfect beaches is a reality residents know all too well. Paradise comes with a price tag that could make a billionaire blink twice. And that price tag is exactly why so many people are packing up their leis and leaving. Let's start with the obvious. Hawaii has the highest cost of living in the entire United States, and it's not even close. Housing costs alone are astronomical. The median home price hovers around numbers that could buy you a mansion in the Midwest. And not a small one, but the kind with a 6-car garage, 2 acres of land, and maybe even a pond with its own ducks. Even rentals can feel like paying a mortgage for a home you don't own. For many residents, the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle isn't a lifestyle choice. It's simply survival. Then there's the unique challenge of living on an island chain. Absolutely everything costs more because absolutely everything has to be shipped. Milk is expensive. Gas is expensive. Groceries are expensive. If it can fit on a boat, you can safely assume you'll be paying a premium for it. A family of 4 can feel like they're funding their own personal import business. Jobs? That's another issue. Hawaii's economy is heavily dependent on 2 industries, tourism and the military. That means a lot of jobs that are either low-paying, seasonal, or highly competitive. Want a high-salary tech job? You'll probably have better luck finding a parking spot in Waikiki during peak season. And speaking of tourism, locals have been vocal for years about overcrowding, over-tourism, rising noise, and environmental strain. Combine that with housing shortages and prices driven up by investors and vacation rentals, and you've got a situation where some residents feel like strangers on their own islands. Another major factor behind Hawaii's population loss is generational displacement. Many young adults leave for college or careers on the mainland, and once they experience lower housing costs and higher wages elsewhere, coming back becomes a dream few can afford. Despite all of this, people still love Hawaii deeply, and that's what makes the outmigration trend especially heartbreaking. It's not that residents want to leave, it's that many feel they have to. When even lifelong locals are saying, "I'd love to stay, but I just can't afford to live here anymore," you know the problem has crossed from frustrating to unsustainable. Hawaii will always be paradise. But for a growing number of former residents, paradise became too expensive to keep. Number 4. New Jersey. New Jersey has been losing residents at a pace that almost feels scripted. One of the biggest reasons people are drifting out is the cost of living, and not the ordinary, "yeah, things are pricey" kind. We're talking about a cost of living index roughly 14% above the national average, which sounds manageable until you add in housing. The median home price in New Jersey now hovers around the mid-$500,000 range, a number that makes first-time buyers reconsider their life choices. Renters aren't getting a break either. Average rents have climbed well past $2,000 per month, and that's before you budget for tolls, car insurance, or the occasional jug handle detour. It's not shocking that younger residents are deciding to start their lives elsewhere, where buying a home doesn't involve auction-style bidding wars and a down payment that feels like a ransom. Then there's the property tax situation, which deserves its own zip code because of how famously backbreaking it is. New Jersey consistently ranks #1 in the entire United States for highest property taxes, with an effective rate of around 2.2%. That means if you buy a $550,000 home, you're casually handing over more than $12,000 every single year just for the privilege of owning it. Some homeowners joke that they're basically renting from the state, and the state is a very strict landlord. This tax burden is one of the biggest reasons retirees, families, and even middle-income professionals are leaving, because their money simply stretches farther almost anywhere else. And we can't ignore the population shifts. For 3 years in a row, New Jersey has been among the top outbound states according to moving companies like United Van Lines and North American Moving Services. In some recent tallies, nearly 65% of interstate moves involving New Jersey were outbound. That's a lot of moving trucks driving west and south, blinking their turn signals like they're waving goodbye. Many of these movers cite affordability and taxes as their primary reasons. Not dissatisfaction with the people, culture, or lifestyle, but sheer financial pressure. On top of all that, commuting costs are a whole category of pain. If you work across the river in New York City, transportation is a very real monthly bill. NJ Transit fares, path fees, tolls, and gas stack up quickly. Even remote workers feel the squeeze because the general cost environment doesn't exactly make working from home feel like a savings strategy. Add in rising auto insurance, which is among the highest in the country, and you start to understand why residents say their expenses feel more like a subscription they never agreed to. Crime isn't a statewide crisis, but the uneven distribution doesn't help. Some cities like Camden, Trenton, and Newark have struggled with higher crime rates for decades. And while there have been improvements, they still influence perception and migration. People naturally gravitate towards safer, more affordable suburbs. And if those suburbs become too expensive, they start looking across state lines. But people aren't leaving because New Jersey is a bad place. They're leaving because their budgets are tired. You can adore the coastline, appreciate the diversity, treasure the schools, and still feel like you're financially running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up. And when nearby states, or even cross-country ones, offer lower property taxes, cheaper housing, and fewer financial curveballs, the decision becomes less emotional and more mathematical. Number 3. Minnesota. Minnesota has quietly become one of the most outbound states in America. Let's start with the weather, since pretending it doesn't matter would be dishonest. Minnesota winters have a reputation, and they earned it. The state regularly sees sub-zero temperatures, wind chills that flirt with the Arctic, and snowfall totals that make you question whether the sky is dumping snow or filing a complaint. The Twin Cities alone average nearly 55 inches of snow a year, with northern towns getting much more. When winter stretches from October to what feels like mid-May, the novelty wears off. People joke that there are 2 seasons in Minnesota, winter and road construction. But the punchline hits differently when you're shoveling your driveway for the 47th time. Climate certainly isn't everything, but it's a major factor behind why some residents finally decide they'd like to feel their toes again. But weather is just one part of the story. The bigger issue driving the exodus is the cost structure, specifically taxes. Minnesota ranks among the top 5 highest tax states in the country when you combine income, sales, and property taxes. The top income tax bracket sits at 9.85%, one of the highest in the U.S., and even middle-income earners feel the squeeze. Property taxes aren't the worst, but they're far from gentle, especially in suburban counties around Minneapolis-St. Paul, where home values, and therefore tax bills, have climbed. When residents compare these burdens to lower tax states like the Dakotas, Florida, or even Wisconsin, it becomes clear why packing up starts sounding financially responsible. Housing costs don't get the dramatic headlines, but the market has been heating up fast. The median home price is now sitting in the mid to upper $300,000 range, which is manageable compared to coastal states, but jarring for natives who remember when the numbers started with a 2. Add rising rents, which routinely exceed $1,500 to $700 per month for a basic apartment in the Twin Cities, and younger people in particular are finding it harder to establish themselves without taking on heavy financial burdens. This affordability squeeze has contributed to the state's declining birth rate and shrinking share of young professionals, a long-term challenge Minnesota can feel already. Minnesota's outbound migration numbers aren't subtle either. For several years, moving companies like United Van Lines and Atlas have ranked the state as one of the top outbound states, with outbound moves making up roughly 55% to 60% of all interstate relocations. Many are heading to the south, where the housing is cheaper, the taxes are lighter, and the weather doesn't try to hurt you. Others are crossing into neighboring Midwestern states that offer similar lifestyles without similar price tags. When people leave for both financial and climate reasons, it becomes harder to reverse the trend. There's also the ongoing conversation around crime and public safety, particularly in Minneapolis. While crime is not statewide, far from it, Minneapolis has seen fluctuations that concern residents, especially when coupled with rising rents and taxes. People who once felt deeply rooted in the metro are now choosing quieter, cheaper, and more predictable areas elsewhere. The irony is that Minnesota remains a genuinely great place to live. If you can afford it, handle the tax structure, and don't mind a few months of icy darkness. The state's quality of life metrics are strong. Excellent healthcare, high-quality public education, a strong job market, and some of the most community-minded residents in the country. But even the best community potlucks can't offset the feeling that your paycheck is melting faster than a snowflake on a space heater. Number 2. Washington. Washington has quietly slipped into the upper ranks of outbound states. People aren't just thinking about leaving, they're actually doing it. And the reasons are rooted in real numbers, not random complaints about the weather. Though the weather does play its part. Let's start with the most obvious factor: housing costs that have entered their own atmosphere. Washington's median home price now sits comfortably above $600,000, with Seattle often climbing well past $800,000 just for a modest house. Even smaller cities like Tacoma, Olympia, and Bellingham have seen price surges that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. As for renters, a basic one-bedroom in Seattle frequently costs $2,000 to $2,400, and that's assuming you don't need parking or a building where the elevator doesn't sound like it's reconsidering its career. For many middle-income families, these prices simply don't add up, and when you compare them to states offering homes for half the cost, the moving truck suddenly looks like a bargain. And while Washington famously has no state income tax, that perk comes with a catch. The state leans heavily on sales taxes, often 10% or higher in many areas, and exceptionally high gas taxes, some of the highest in the country in fact. Add rising utility costs, ongoing transportation fees, and the general premium of living in a high-demand state. And Washington begins to feel less like a financial safe haven, and more like an expensive subscription service you didn't mean to renew. Even high earners are noticing that their take-home pay evaporates much faster than they expected, once they factor in housing, taxes, and general cost of living increases. Then there's the issue of population stagnation and outbound migration. According to moving companies like United Van Lines and U-Haul, Washington has shifted into outbound territory, with some reports showing more than 55% of long-distance moves leaving the state. That's a big shift for a place that used to draw new residents at a steady pace. Young professionals, the very group Washington used to attract, are now heading to states like Idaho, Utah, Texas, and even the Midwest because the cost of entry is simply more reasonable. Retirees, meanwhile, are eyeing states with lower housing costs and warmer climates, because let's be honest, wet winters aren't the retirement dream. Speaking of winters, the weather deserves an honorable mention. Yes, it's not Minnesota-level brutal, but the relentless gray skies and 150-plus days of rain per year in the Puget Sound region take a toll. Even lifelong residents admit that the gloom wears you down after a while. People who moved for the natural beauty sometimes feel like they rarely get to see it through the fog. And while eastern Washington offers sunny skies and drier seasons, it also comes with its own challenges, including increasing wildfire smoke, rising summer temperatures, and growing concerns about drought. Crime and homelessness also play a role in pushing residents out, especially in major metro areas. Seattle, Tacoma, and Spokane have all seen rising homelessness numbers and localized crime spikes that concern families looking for safety and stability. While these issues aren't statewide, they're concentrated in the areas where most of the population lives, which means they influence overall migration decisions more heavily than the numbers might suggest. Washington remains a stunning state with a strong economy, but the equation has changed. When you combine soaring housing prices, heavy cost burdens, tax trade-offs, urban challenges, and a damp climate that sometimes feels personally offended when the sun tries to shine, it becomes clear why residents are pulling out calculators and reconsidering their geographic loyalty. The departure isn't driven by lack of appreciation. It's driven by financial exhaustion and a search for balance. Number 1. Alaska. Alaska is losing residents faster than almost anywhere else in the country. And this isn't a recent quirk, it's a trend, one that's been going on for years. The state has posted population declines for multiple consecutive years, with more people moving out than in. The number one reason driving people away is the cost of living, which is impressively high for a state that doesn't even have a Trader Joe's. Alaska's cost of living runs 20 to 25% above the national average, depending on the region. And that's before you start factoring in the reality that almost everything has to be shipped in. Grocery prices are legendary. A gallon of milk can flirt with $6, basic fruit can feel like a luxury item, and eating out can turn a casual meal into a financial event. Housing isn't cheap either. The median home price in Alaska hovers around $400,000, and while that's less than expensive coastal states, the utility costs, heating bills, and maintenance add thousands more every year. Renters also feel the sting, with average rents around $1,400 to $1,800, depending on the city, and that doesn't include the cost of keeping your home from freezing during winter. Speaking of winter, Alaska's climate is not simply cold. It's the kind of cold that requires a survival plan. Residents regularly deal with sub-zero temperatures, snow measured in feet rather than inches, and darkness that stretches for months in some regions. Yes, the midnight sun is beautiful in summer, but the trade-off is a winter where the sun clocks in late, dips out early, and barely shines in some areas. Seasonal depression rates are higher here than almost anywhere else in the U.S., and even lifelong Alaskans admit that the darkness wears on them. For people who move in without fully understanding the realities, the climate becomes a deal-breaker. Add in the state's geographic isolation, and the challenges multiply. Everything is far away. Other states, family, specialty healthcare, cheaper retail options, road access. In many communities, flying isn't a convenience, it's a necessity. And those flights aren't cheap. Even short trips within the state can cost as much as flying cross-country. For residents who need frequent travel for medical care, family, or work, Alaska becomes not just logistically difficult but financially exhausting. Another major factor pushing people out is the job market volatility. Alaska relies heavily on oil, gas, fishing, and tourism, all industries that rise and fall with economic swings. When oil prices are low or fisheries face restrictions, jobs disappear quickly. Younger workers especially have been leaving for more predictable opportunities in the lower 48, contributing to a decades-long trend. Alaska's population is aging, while its youth population shrinks. Several reports show that the state has one of the highest outbound migration rates among young adults. And when young people leave in large numbers, everything from the tax base to school enrollments takes a hit. Then there's the healthcare challenge. Access to specialists is limited, especially outside Anchorage and Fairbanks. Many Alaskans travel out of state for major procedures, adding thousands of dollars to health-related expenses. For retirees or families with chronic medical needs, this becomes a determining factor, no matter how beautiful the mountains are. Public safety concerns also influence migration. Some areas have higher than average crime rates, especially in remote communities dealing with limited law enforcement resources. Residents in these regions often cite safety and stability as reasons for relocating to more accessible and better resourced states. And yet, for all these challenges, people still love Alaska, which is why the decision to leave often comes with heartbreak. The state is magnificent, the culture is unique, the communities are close-knit, and the sense of adventure is unmatched. But when you combine isolation, high prices, harsh winters, job market instability, and healthcare limitations, even the most loyal Alaskan eventually starts thinking about a lower cost of living and shorter winters. In summary, Alaska's population loss is driven by a perfect storm of high costs, difficult climate, geographic separation, limited job diversification, and healthcare access struggles. It's not that people don't value the lifestyle, it's that the lifestyle demands more than many families can comfortably give. And that brings us to the end of our countdown. Thank you so much for watching and spending this time with me. It truly means a lot. If this video gave you new insight, opened your eyes to a trend you didn't expect, or just taught you something interesting about how Americans are choosing where to live, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more smart, data-driven retirement and relocation content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Now drop a comment below. Which state on this list surprised you the most? And have you ever thought about leaving your own state?